Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today, we're diving into an absolute classic, yes, Red Dead Redemption, and testing how it performs on a low-end PC without a graphics card, running on an i3 processor. Now, if you've been in the low-spec gaming trenches with me, you know that seeing an AAA title like this running on our setup is the ultimate dream. But will it be a Wild West adventure, or are we setting ourselves up for a modern-day PC showdown? Let's jump in, crank down the graphics, and see what kind of FPS we're dealing with. Alright, so I kicked things off by testing Red Dead Redemption at 1080p. Everything was cranked down to the bare minimum. Textures, shadows, and of course, FSR 3 was left untouched. I won't lie. I went into this with fingers crossed, almost afraid to look at the FPS counter. But surprisingly, the game held up, giving me a decent 30 to 40 FPS most of the time. And it actually felt pretty smooth. I was genuinely impressed, though part of me was still on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Now, being a low-spec gamer at heart, I knew it was time to push it even further down the resolution ladder. Yes, the 1080p looked passable, but let's be real, our low-spec tradition calls for a 720p experience. So, after a moment of hesitation, I took the plunge. And there it was, sheer smoothness. The FPS shot up to a buttery 60, and I finally felt like I could let out a sigh of relief. Sure, the graphics became a bit more pixelated, especially in open areas. It was like playing through a nostalgic, hazy western. The landscapes took on a bit of a vintage film effect, and up close, things looked a tad blocky. But for that 60 FPS, I was willing to accept these quirks with a big grin. That being said, it wasn't all a perfect ride-off into the sunset. As I galloped through busier towns or more intense scenes, the FPS had some minor hiccups. There were moments, just brief ones, where the frames dipped to around 15 to 20 FPS. Fortunately, these moments passed quickly, and before I knew it, I was back to smooth sailing. Another amusing quirk was in the sky itself. Every so often, I'd spot faint square-shaped boxes up there, like clouds made out of pixels. But honestly, even with these quirks, it was still hard to complain. Now, a little confession. You're probably wondering why I didn't turn on AMD FSR 3 to give the performance an extra boost. Well, I did try. With FSR on, there was this odd lag to everything, just enough to make the controls feel heavy, almost like my cowboy boots were dragging through molasses. Even if it didn't show up on the recording, the slowdown was noticeable enough to make me turn it right back off. I fiddled with different combinations, and after some trial and error, I found that keeping FSR off made the gameplay so much smoother. If you're testing this yourself, definitely give different settings a shot, though. As low-spec gamers, experimenting with graphics options is just part of the game. So let's get into the meat of the Red Dead Redemption PC port gameplay itself. The hype has been building up for this release for ages. I think every PC gamer who's even slightly into open-world games or Rockstar titles has been crossing their fingers for this port to finally happen. And now that it's here, I have to say, Rockstar and 011 have done a pretty solid job of bringing that Old West vibe to our desktops, mostly intact, even if it's not as polished as we might have hoped. Now, right off the bat, even on low settings, there's still something about this game that just feels alive. The world of Red Dead Redemption is rich with personality, NPCs bustle around, the wildlife feels vibrant, and the environments have this rugged charm that pulls you in. This is classic Rockstar world building at its best, and it's one of those games where you can tell a lot of love was poured into creating a deeply immersive setting. Even though the graphics are somewhat dated, the game has aged surprisingly well. After a while, I didn't notice the lower resolution textures as much because the game's overall atmosphere just sort of took over. The dialogue and cutscenes are cinematic, the interactions with NPCs feel authentic, and I kept finding myself stopping to appreciate the small details. the dust clouds that rise when you gallop through a canyon, or the way the sun filters through tree branches as you ride through the forest. However, it's important to keep in mind that this is, at its core, still a port of a PS3-era game. Some things haven't aged as well, and they definitely remind you that you're playing a game from 14 years ago. Textures, for instance, are a mixed bag. There are moments where they look a bit muddy and pixelated, especially when you get up close. The lighting effects are decent, but lack the polish you'd expect from newer games. And every so often, I'd run into NPCs who just stop in their tracks or get hilariously stuck on bits of terrain. It's almost funny, like seeing an old friend who still has some of the same quirks they had years ago. Rockstar did add FSR, Fidelity FX Super Resolution, and DLSS, Deep Learning Super Sampling, but it feels almost unnecessary, maybe even a little bit ironic, that a game this old needs these performance boosts. You'd expect the game to run smoothly without them on any modern setup, but apparently, the optimizations weren't enough to make these enhancements redundant. Some modders could probably make it look and run even better, which I wouldn't be surprised to see down the line. Now, let's talk about the price point, $50 for a game that's more than a decade old. I have to admit, that felt a little steep to me. Sure, it's a classic, and it's great to have it on PC with a few added tweaks, but it's still largely the same game that was released in 2010. If you're a massive fan of the Red Dead series or just really want to relive John Marston's story, you might find that $50 is worth it for the nostalgia and the convenience of playing on PC. But if you're new to the series or just curious, I'd honestly say it's worth waiting for a sale. Around $30 would be a fair price for what you're getting here. For the time being, though, it's hard to overlook that price tag, especially when you consider that there's no major visual overhaul or new content. So overall, whether or not this port is worth it depends on what you're hoping to get out of it. If you're after that classic Red Dead experience and are willing to overlook some quirks and a high price, you'll have a good time with it. But if you're looking for a revamped, fully remastered experience, it might feel a little lacking. Rockstar has brought us a great classic game to PC, but it doesn't feel like they've gone the extra mile to make it feel like a fresh release. One of the things that immediately stands out in Red Dead Redemption is the sheer craftsmanship Rockstar put into creating this world. Even with the graphics turned down to suit our low-spec needs, you can feel the painstaking detail in every scene. The weather effects, for instance, are stunning. There's nothing like a dusty windstorm sweeping through the plains, or the way the environment changes when a storm rolls in, with lightning cracking across the sky. Even on reduced settings, this world feels alive in a way that few games achieve, and that's a huge credit to Rockstar's original vision. Whether you're roaming through the parched deserts, skirting dense forests, or navigating treacherous mountain passes, each environment feels distinct, and you're drawn into the landscape in a way that makes you forget you're playing on an older title. It's like stepping into an old Western movie, only this time, you're in control. The character interactions and random encounters in the open world add another layer of immersion, and this really brings home the charm of Red Dead Redemption. Rockstar excels at making worlds feel organic, and this game is no exception. You'll be riding along minding your own business, and then suddenly, there's a stranger calling for help off the side of the road, or a group of bandits lying in ambush. These encounters happen randomly, keeping you on your toes and reminding you that this Wild West world is unpredictable. Even NPCs have a life of their own. They'll go about their business, comment on your presence, or even react based on your reputation in the game. The world feels truly inhabited, and every encounter adds layers to your experience. Playing as John Marston, you feel like you're genuinely a part of this rugged, unforgiving world, and it's amazing that this sense of immersion holds up even with graphics settings lowered. When it comes to gameplay mechanics, I was surprised at how well the combat and missions have aged. There's a certain weight to the gunplay that makes every shot feel impactful. The Deadeye system is especially satisfying, letting you slow down time to take out multiple enemies with precision, which feels like a perfect fit for the gunslinger theme. Missions are varied enough to keep things interesting, ranging from shootouts and robberies to hunting wild animals and taming horses. That said, there are some design aspects that feel a bit dated by today's standards. For instance, the pacing can be slow, and the occasional escort mission or herding task might feel tedious if you're used to more streamlined gameplay. But there's a kind of charm to these older mechanics that adds to the authenticity of the Western experience. You get to be a real cowboy, complete with all the thrills and the slower moments of frontier life, which can be refreshing in a world of fast-paced, hyper-stylized games. All in all, Red Dead Redemption on PC may not be a groundbreaking remake, but it's a fantastic trip back in time to one of gaming's most iconic worlds. The game lets you lose yourself in an open-world experience that's both relaxing and exciting, with a narrative that still resonates. The story of John Marston's struggle to leave his outlaw life behind is engaging and compelling, and you genuinely feel for his character. This port may have a few rough edges, but the heart of Red Dead Redemption is still there, beating as strong as ever. Whether you're a newcomer or a returning fan, this PC version delivers a taste of the Old West that's hard to beat, even on a low-spec setup. So, is the Red Dead Redemption PC port worth it for low-end PC gamers? Well, it depends. If you're a hardcore fan or love experimenting with graphics settings like me, it's a solid experience, even with its quirks. This port may not be the remaster we were all secretly hoping for, but there's no denying it's still one of the best Western games out there. And running it on a low-end rig like mine feels like a win, even with a few compromises. So, while it may have some rough edges, if you're itching to hit the dusty trails of the Old West, this PC port still gets the job done. And there we have it, Cowboys and Cowgirls, Red Dead Redemption on a low-end PC. If you enjoyed the review, or if you're here just to see me put my poor PC through more AAA torture, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and let me know what game I should try next. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. Happy gaming!
There's much treasure here. You want map? I retire. Here, take map. You earn it.
Thanks, mister. I could use a little luck.